Good afternoon and welcome to the press conference of the film très, grande évasion, Tax Me If You Can, a film which is being presented in a special screening within the official section. And to talk about the film, we have the pleasure of having with us several of the creators. We have, first of all, starting by my far right, BERTRAND, producer, YANNICK, KERGOAT, the director, and DENIS, the screenplay writer. Okay, we're very pleased to have you here in San Sebastian with us. And I would like to break the ice by asking a question. And plus, we've got the producer, director, and screenplay writer. Could you please tell us how the idea of making a film upon this subject matter, which is quite a hot subject and which interests people a lot, that we know very little about? I don't know who wants to perhaps start. I can start in Spanish, a few words, but not many, perhaps. Not all of it. This film was an idea that three of us had 5 or 6 years ago, because it seemed to us that the problem of tax evasion was a problem which was the mother of many problems that existed in a society, and also inequalities. Yannick? Yes, it's a project that we obviously well prepared between the three of us. It's not frequent that the producer is in the heart of a project, but he, the producer, got Denis and myself together. We didn't know each other beforehand. It's a film, a production film, and Bertrand took the project all the way through to the end. As I was saying, it's a problem which seemed to us to be of utmost importance within our current society. We believe that tax evasion is not a peripheral problem, it's a defect of the economic and capitalist system in which we work. But the truth is, it's a tool which in the middle of the liberal worldization, it's a consequence of which has other repercussions, socially speaking, mediatically speaking, and also economically. We documented and researched the subject matter. We tried to understand what were the mechanisms and the main actors. Where did the political responsibilities of this phenomenon lie? And then we tried to make a film so that the audience in general can understand what tax evasion is. It's a challenge. It was a commitment to talk about taxes, tax fraud, not a very cinematographic subject matter, nothing easy, obviously, to convey to the large audiences on a large screen. I hope we've achieved it at least a little bit. It is true. It was an initiative of Bertrand's initiative, the producer. Almost 6 years of work, of meetings and reflecting upon the issue, because nothing was at all easy. I think Bertrand got Yannick and I together because Yannick was coming from a great success, film success, with a critique upon the media, which was called the nouveau chien de garde, the new watchdogs. And so I was talking about banks, talked about banks and multinational companies in a legal issue which was called Clearstream. And I had written a lot about tax fraud and about tax havens and tax evasion. This is a key part of my work. I reflect a lot as regards how our wealthy countries can produce so much poverty. And I take my hat off to Yannick, because I was there to hold the interviews and to be with him. But Yannick was the artifice, shall we say, and it was quite complicated. And just as he mentioned, he had to try to manage the fruit of these reflections could be something fluid, and it could be a film with a certain rhythm or pace to it. The first versions that we did were fantastic because it captivates people based upon, well, as regards to a very difficult and arid subject, but it's a fundamental aspect, whether in Spain, France, or in England. the lies upon tax that are constructed in the States vis-a-vis the political life of our countries. Perhaps I've been a bit extensive in my answer, or a lengthy answer. I would like to add this in France. It's easy for me that I always ask myself, how could this be? There are people who don't participate in society in which they live in, and instead of going on holidays with certain people, and the holidays one pays for the bills and the other people don't. How can this be, and how can we let these people do this? Okay, questions? There's one over there, and there's another question over here. Yes, I was just saying, you've tried to understand the mechanisms of tax evasion, and I'm not too sure, but I'd like to know whether, did you get into the minds, thanks to the film, you've got into the minds of a tax evader, and what's behind that, the idea of wanting to evade finance, or is it just wanted to be rich, or is it, are they villains, or the super villains, these tax evaders of our modern times we live in? It's quite difficult to know what's in the head of a multinational. These are the big tax evaders vis-a-vis volumes, the big multinationals, but as regards people, individuals, the truth is that there's a psychological profile. It's easy. The rich want to know what they want to pay the tax department or the Internal Revenue Department, and beyond wanting to make a lot of money and to make the biggest amount of money possible and pay the least amount possible to tax to the Internal Revenue Service. There's an idea, for example, there are people hyper rich, the ultra rich or wealthy. They always request to evade. There are tax lawyers, banks, management, fortune management, managers of wealth and fortunes. On the one side, we have the wealthy, but then we got the facilitators that they have around them and seduce them so that they can perpetuate tax evasion. And there's a lot of greed, but there's also an industry that surrounds this that amplifies this and favors it. And there's also a certain discourse and semantics and an ideology behind it. Liberalism, not in the sense of Tocqueville, because this has been deformed and perverted. But what does it mean to be liberal? Is to be less state, less taxes, and address and situate yourself in front of inequality. That's where the inequality of our societies start from. Then there are discourses that we see in society, journalists, ministers, people, intermediaries, who at the end of the day are the first vectors of tax evasion. And this key issue within our societies is never dealt with from the right perspective, and that's a challenge of the film, a film which generates rage, really. And we've studied what happened in France for the last 50 years, from Maladur. There are always the same discourses that try to justify this fraud, and this benefits the super wealthy and the oligarchs. Our vision, our approach, because we're not militants, we're not in any political party. We all have different backgrounds, but at a certain moment, you've got to say things as they are. An oligarch is an oligarch, and these people take advantage of everything at present. And I don't know what happens here, but in France, they possess the TV channels, the publishing houses, the newspapers, and they also possess the ministers. It's very difficult to fight against this. And in order to answer specifically, I've been able to get into the head of a tax evader. I come from a family in which they said the state has to take their hands out of our pockets. We shouldn't pay tax, and the less tax you pay, the better. That's how I was brought up, with this mindset: you shouldn't pay tax. My father, with his third cancer, and I adored him, and the ambulances that came to pick him up didn't cost him anything. And I thought that solidarity had virtues because there was a social security system. and we had our discussions as regards this. But today, I think we have to go back to an idea, or return to an idea that it's always repeated around the people who pay taxes are stupid, and we shouldn't take advantage, they don't have to take advantage of the system. The people that pay taxes, I think, are very classy.
Hi, this is a question from Brazil. My name is Rodrigo. First of all, we see in the end the face of a monster who is Paulo Guedes, the Minister of Economy of Brazil, that's responsible for our ruin currently. I would like to ask you about if you've got some informations about the effect of all this tax evasion upon Latin America, especially Brazil. But my main question is more technical. I got really amazed by the way you used animation to create the visual style of the film. It's a very interesting use of animation. I would like to hear a few words about that and how was your crew of animators to create that. Thank you.
Alors, sur la première partie de votre question.
As regards the first part of the question, we have no specific information vis-à-vis Brazil. Tax evasion covers many countries and many states, and this democratic problem occurs in many countries, and it also occurs in Spain and France, in all European countries. And in many other countries, who are the ones that benefit directly from the tax evasion, what we call tax havens. So, and plus, vis-a-vis animation in the film, yes, we have a collaborator who was in charge of the Gerve Resclété. I'd already made a film with him. We had a very good communication and perspective to find the specific place where to introduce the animation in the film. Animation for us are a way of providing technical information, elements to explain it, the information of tax evasion, so it's not difficult to understand, so that people can understand it clearly, for it to be evident, and it didactic, humoristic, light and fun, so that the film is not a despair from the beginning to the end. Animation, that's what we used it for. And also, there's a basic notion when we wanted to finance the film through Wild Bunch. There weren't too many people that did finance us. That wasn't interesting to people. That's what the producer said. No. They're not interested in this subject matter. They're not going to pay it if you treat it poorly. But if it does affect them. And the idea for Yannick and myself was that it doesn't bore them. And pedagogic is teaching, it's didactic and it's humor, that's what it's used for. And plus, we hit back because we've been hit very hard, and we've got to return a few shots back, even though it's through animation. Why not? Hi, you've spoken. The screenplay writer says that this film generates rage, and that's exactly the feeling that you have when you see the film. We thought it as much, but these explanations makes us much more aware. So therefore, beyond this didactic idea and to transmit, to convey in a very nice way or an easy way all of the tricks used and how the multinationals, the political class, and how every small hit they have always has a trick to get out of the way. This frustration and rage that is left to us, my question is, what space is there beyond knowing it and knowing how the political class is working? What about we citizens, all the social cuts that we have to suffer and the consequences of this tax evasion? I know it's probably almost difficult to answer, but what's left to us, we taxpayers? How do we respond? Yes, that's right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer I give myself is that the answer has to be democratic. There's got to be a democratic revolution, refound our institutions. The film concludes proposing the following idea.
Nos gouvernements, nos dirigeants,
Our governments now today, the economic and political powers, work like an oligarchy. And that is, it's an extensive word. It's almost an umbrella idea or concept, but it makes a lot of sense. The solution, knowledge about this problem and denouncing it or reporting it, there's something that we still have to do there. People feel powerless democratically, and with the reporting it and explaining the phenomenon and reporting this, there's a lot of despair. Despair, why? Why is there a democratic despair in the middle? And this opens the field for there to be political currents in France that's quite clear, which is the extreme right wing. And they have a lot of material. We've got to think about a democratic revolution. Pick up again the general interest that the people have, and not the individual interests of a group which is more reduced in solid areas, the people that have the economic, media, and political power. I wouldn't go beyond that definition. Make films, make documentaries in films, and that is constructive. It allows you to understand and make people aware, make people, the audience, aware about a series of hidden phenomena. That's why it's so important for it to be a film in that format, on the big screen, a feature film. No TV in France would have financed this film. A way to answer you would be, we had an idea, a distant and informal idea when we started to think about making this film. But it's materializing nowadays. We see that the film brings about discussion, questions, and many associations, attack, the people of the diplomatic world, anti-corps, independent media, and so on and so forth. And the hope we have today is that this film can awaken that rage, can awaken that awareness. There is a relentless, there's a relentless approach in the film. When you leave the film, you can't justify tax evasion. You can't listen to that discourse of Manuel Macron or Le Maire, our Minister for the Economy. You can't hear it, listen to it the same way. And the hope we have, the three of us, I think, is that when people leave the film, they can talk about this and they won't vote in the same way. Or at least they won't be fooled in the same way, perhaps, as of here. It's a long and complicated story that we've tried to tell. This film is not similar to any other films that are relating to the same subject matter, because we convey a really political message. The rage exists. That rage does exist. The film gives some clue about how we can channel and orientate that rage so that democratically we can find solutions. This is one of the vocations of the film, but every time we were with people that talk about tax evasion, I say, we don't have the tools. We don't have tools so that the people can take this to their political members or to different forum. These questions have to be discussed and debated. That rage will be expressed otherwise in a very poor, not a very reasonable way. I'll give you an example. When I wanted to propose Denis and Yannick this film, I had a drawing. I don't remember who the drawer was. There were three people around the table, and there was a gentleman with a banker, with well-dressed, with a top hat, with a lot of cookies on a dish, and next to him there was a character dressed normally with one cookie, and the other hand there was a person that had nothing, a miserable person without any cookie. And the wealthy guy says to the guy with one cookie, careful, he's going to take your cookie away from you. And now there are dominant discourses that make you see the things as they are not. And when people that are intellectually and technically armed, tax evasion is not difficult to understand and to do. I'm not going to give you names, but there are people in the film who understood things very well, and they don't hide behind their words. So that we can all understand it, we can all organize ourselves. This debate should be confiscated by technicisms, technical words that can only be taken advantage of by the people who have the money behind them. Yes.
Let me ask you something. I would like to understand the way, the financial side of this film. How do you put a project like that in operation, if there were some resistance concerning supporter? But I have a second question. We have a lot of information, we learn a lot from the film, but it's cinema. And this is what impressed me the most. And it's very difficult for me to understand the place of a movie like this in the history, or at least the recent history of French documentary cinema. I would like to hear you about that. Do you think France nowadays is producing documentaries with such innovation in terms of aesthetical innovation? This is a point. Because the movie is very strong, again, in terms of information, in terms of analysis, but aesthetically it's something very radical. I would like to hear you about that.
D'abord, merci d'avoir apprécié le film.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having appreciated this film. The truth is, there's no current of documentaries in France vis-a-vis this issue. I can't give you any references. It doesn't enter into the current line of documentaries, but there are many political documentaries and films that address political issues that interest many people and the audience in general. There's a current in cinema, documentary auteur films, documentaries that we know quite well. And there's a tradition of political films, but as regards the format and the aesthetics of the film, with the ambition of dealing it or addressing it from that point of view, I can't give you any more example. There are other films, but it's not a current. There's not many of us. We would like for there to be more documentaries of this nature with these aesthetics, but we're a bit on our own out there. Well, I can't add much more to this. I agree with Yannick. I produced a film which was shown in competition, a documentary which was called Les Juges Mis, no judges, no being submitted. This is something that was done in France, and it was presented here, and it was well accepted. Un pièce, certain judge talked about police violence in France, but it was premiered in Australia and in Japan, etc. But these problems seem to be local, but I think they're universal. We've traveled and we've seen them in other places. They have a place now, but not in traditional media. But thanks to film, which is a place for debate, and thanks to courageous people like our distributor in film, thanks to crowdfunding, because we had access to the financing, because people were saying, no, we're not, it's not. The people who take financial decisions, we weren't going to get any money, but we asked the audience whether they were interested, and we managed to achieve 200,000 euros in a crowdfunding because people wanted us to make the film. 5,000 or 6,000 people said, yes, I will pay some money, I want this film to be made. So we've got partnerships with many associations that are in civil society, and the result of this film and the way it's been accepted, apart from Merci Patron, it's been well received. That is to say, this genre, the documentary genre in cinema or film, it wants to go where it can hurt, where it can damage, not phagocyted or prohibited areas, but we're entering into difficult areas that are difficult to demonstrate. These documentaries that you mentioned can have an international scope or reach to them, because this also affects Spain and France and Italy, so therefore this also affects Luxembourg. That's why there are subtitles from the outset, because we think the international virtue of the film, that's what we're thinking of, because this happens everywhere throughout the world, and what we wanted to do was to be, so this can be talked about throughout the world. a while back, I made a documentary which was called Journal de Team des Affaires en Cours, and it was called the Geneva Call was, well, people from all countries. Garzon, it was the first time the Garzon talked about with a foreign journalists. There were Italian judges or magistrates. There were 7. And a book was published, Justice Under Chaos, which was translated to those countries. I traveled through all of those countries with the book more than with the film because I couldn't find the format. And 20 years later, this was in 1996, almost over 20 years ago, but it talks to everyone in a very didactic manner. In the 25 years, everything that we had already understood 25 years ago, this has been multiplied, it's been multiplied, and that's where rage has increased. The judges are completely powerless, and the politician oligarchs laugh, and the oligarchs become wealthier. And thank God there are films, and moments like this is formidable. To be invited to a festival like this, these are little seeds that we slowly but surely plant. We hope that this can bear its fruits, and I feel very good here. Take advantage now to thank José Luis and his team. Thank you, José Luis, for inviting us, because that's a signal that there is potential beyond France. We're very happy, not only because of us, because the problem is a worldwide problem. I don't know whether José Luis is more or less sponsored than other countries and is courageous and brave enough, but we're very pleased to have been invited. We've got to finish, but I'd like to ask a final question, and that is, we've talked several times about the cinematographic aspect. You've talked about the film, and could you please talk about something that I thought was quite surprising, is the editing work, because Yannick is a veteran in editing. In the room, he's worked with very important directors. How did you work with Denis, for example, for all of that information that you've got in the film? And I imagine, which it's a result of deep documentation, and how to edit this, because it's spectacular work that you've done there. When we had to start to work in the editing room, editing room bores me quite a lot. I can't be patient enough to be behind a TV screen to do this editing work. So therefore, I'm the boss of I'm the director of a media company in France, and I gave this work to Yannick. He's got to take the glory because of the editing work. I was quite present for the interviews, but constructing the film, the editing work has all lied in Yannick's work. It probably doesn't surprise anyone for the people who know the work, but films are written in the editing room. It's an editing work which explains everything. That's where we find the examples, when we choose the archives, or that we're going to allow us to address certain aspects. In the editing room, we conceived and written the comments and conceived the animation. That's where everything happens. The most important part is in the editing part of a film, a true almost a year and a half of work. It's a new phase of writing. It's a very long process and very hard work, and a lot of work. And I'm an editor. I mean, in fiction films, especially some documentaries, but especially fiction films, this has enabled me to address this work in a very relaxed manner, in a paused manner. I know we had to work in stages, slowly but surely, with versions. I don't get nervous, because I should, because it's a film with a lot of material. I'm not going to manage this, but I take it very relaxedly. I breathe, and I like the editing work in the editing room. The difficult thing in these types of this type of subject matter is that despite everything, if you want to make a film story, you need a narrative, the beginning, the middle, and the end. We need a rhythm. You need dynamics in the film. You've got to keep the audience awake throughout the entire film. How not to lose my audience or spectator, be it a man or a woman, with the editing work. And that's the work, that's where the directing work really takes place, with one single objective in mind. I don't have to bore the people who know, and I don't have to leave exclude those that know nothing about the subject matter. I've got to buy an intermediate line to maintain both sides of the audience, and this takes time. It was a year and a half of work in the editing room, looking for archives, writing, and reducing. Like any film, you've got a first version, which takes 2 hours and 45 minutes, and then you take away 15 minutes and 15 minutes. And quite sincerely, I would have liked to have taken another 15 minutes out of the film, but I couldn't manage to do so. I hope that despite everything, the audience is hooked all the way to the end. Yes, one final question in the back there, and we finish. Yes, I'd like to ask you about the legislation which you address in the film, but I'm not too sure what's the situation now, because I think European directives have been set up to fight against tax havens, but what happens for this to be a sterile work, or do they believe we're in a moment of possible change? I don't think there's going to be any change for the time being at a European level. Even the law passed by the OCDE of less than 15% of tax evasion in Europe, an opposition by Austria, it opposed itself to signing this text, and it wasn't signed. There's not going to be any significant change, but it's not going to be taxed. The tax directive is not going to be approved by a majority or unanimously. Ministers, Euro parliamentarians, they all know that unless we have a treaty that imposes an absolute majority upon tax issues, nothing will happen in Europe. It won't change things at all. Not a majority, no, unanimously, not an absolute majority, no, unanimously of the 17 member countries. That's the rule in Europe at present, and this is guaranteed in the treaties. If this doesn't happen, nothing will happen, and it will be left alone. And what we foresee in the G20, in the OECD, dominated extensively by American policy or politics, this will only be applied with enormous difficulties within the framework of the European Union if this does happen. There's some leverage in the treaties, but this is not used. Article 104 forms part of it all, but we haven't mentioned this in the film because it's quite complex. There's legal leverage, there are documents and treaties to try to do something. But there are partnerships between different countries to act unilaterally, that is to say, leave the European corset or abandon it. It's a corset, I insist upon this, such as Europe is written down and defined by the treaties. There are some countries and people responsible at a political level that are sure that they like to do things on your own. You've got to do this according to groups of countries, in small groups and a small committee. Yes, it's also possible to find where the oligarchs' money is. This has happened with the Ukrainian conflict. There's a traceability of that money. With computers, we can see the financial itineraries. There are yachts which have been blocked and they've been seized. The people that supported Putin, there's money that's been found. When there's a strong political pressure, it's possible to find that money and block it. But it's a political will above all, but in Europe there's no political will to do so. Not with Moscovici, the French commissioner, or people like, for example, Junckers, the previous one. These were the manufacturers of this tax evasion system. With these characters, nothing's going to change. Despite the looks, the Luxembourg papers, for example, economically and financially, Luxembourg would never flourish. These people are way ahead of us. The politicians are accomplices to these people in France. Emmanuel Macron at no time talks about tax evasion. He doesn't transmit it into a political message, neither does the right wing. the extreme right. Only the left wing, someone has a certain will, but we are under the feeling that we are far away from doing it, managing to achieve this. So therefore, I'm not sure how to say, the film shows a certain exasperation and violence. And despite everything, there are possibilities. I did a survey, 10 years of judgment against me, a trial against a clearance house, which is called Clearstream, where it shows Clearstream is a dark chamber which permits tax evasion in the country. And if you want to find those financial itineraries, you've got to control the clearing houses. There's also Clearstream in Belgium and Luxembourg, and there are other bodies in other countries. But as there's no worldwide will to do so, because the US and other countries, the G20, that's where things happen. But nothing is solved. They don't want this. Only the pressure of the people can really manage to achieve this. Okay? Well, we have to finish now. All we have is to do is to thank our invited guests who have come here to present their film in San Celeste. Thank you very much. And we hope that the film can be seen as much as possible, and a lot of luck to you.
Merci beaucoup, merci. Merci. Au revoir.